A few days ago, Fabiano Caruana put out this tweet in the wake of the events that have unfolded in the Sinquefield Cup in St. Louis. Now, in this tweet, he's referencing the psychological impact that certain players have on their opponents. Not just in chess, but we see this in all sports, of course. Now, Magnus has had this effect on his opponent for a number of years, being ever so dominant as world number one and world champion. And Hans is having this effect on people in this tournament simply because of all the events that have unfolded. And I mention this because in this game, he had white against Wesley So here, and Wesley references the fact that he just wanted to be solid today with the black pieces. He'd have been very happy with a draw here, and I just find it very interesting given Wesley's about 100 points higher rated. You know, arguably he'd normally push for more and so on. So really interesting to see the psychological impact that all of this stuff that's unfolding is having on the players at the board. So let's see what happened. Niemann had white. This is round 6 of the Sinquefield Cup, and he kicks off here with pawn to e4. So we had e5 from Wesley, knight f3, knight f6 now played. So the Petrov not going in for the knight c6 stuff. And here Wesley said he just wanted to be solid, and he didn't see so many games in the database for Hans playing against the Petrov. So now we had takes on e5, d6, the knight drops back. Hans has dabbled with the knight d3 stuff there as well, by the way. We saw quite a bit of that in the Fabi Magnus match of 2018. Now we had takes on e4, and Hans goes for the classical approach, pawn to d4, and black strikes back, d5 takes the space in the centre. So bishop d3 played. And now Wesley plays a bit of an offbeat system here. You see a lot more commonly knight c6, bishop e7, d6, all kind of mainline moves. But bishop f5 was played. This is also a common idea, but not usually done so early. So now we had castles played. The bishop came to e7. Rook e1 pressures that knight. Castles was played. And after knight b to d2 here, there's big pressure on this knight. By the way, you can go c4 immediately, but Hans just holds off on that break for a moment. And now there's no good way to actually defend the knight. And if you take on d2, this is no good because you're dropping the bishop here. Knight takes back with check. Now you're not losing material, but white does have the bishop pair now. Good lead in development, first to the open file. So this is uncomfortable for black. Quite a decent advantage for white there. So the knight drops back to d6. This is the tried and tested move. Now knight f1 played, looking to come around to say g3 or e3 in the future. You open up the bishop to develop. Pawn c6 from Wesley. Bishop f4 develops. And now these bishops chop off. The queen recaptures. And when you just look at the position here, this is why the Petrov has such a rock-solid reputation. You know, it's not like the Sicilian where you instantly imbalance the pawn structure. Here you've got a completely symmetrical pawn structure. It's not easy for the white player to make inroads here, especially at this elite level. Now, the next move from Wesley is really nice. Shows good understanding of the position. I mean, how many of us would play something like knight d7 here? But the problem is you're getting a bit of a traffic jam there with these three pieces. They're kind of trying to occupy some of the same squares. So we had knight a6 from Wesley, but it's going on this journey now, which we'll see. So the knight came to e3. This one comes to c7, and it's heading for this lovely e6 square where it's going to pressure this bishop and other points in the white position. And now b3 from Hans, bit of a new move really. We've seen Vichy play this position, for example, with rook to e2, preparing to double. We've also seen rook d1 from Vichy. But now we had b3, support c4, logical move, although you do weaken some dark squares when you play like this. So the knight came to e6. We now had bishop e5, and white doesn't mind if black were to go f6 here, because after the bishop drops, well, you've now weakened the knight. There's a target on the e-file. Not so great to weaken the king like that. Never play f6, as Ben Feingold says. Excuse me. So after bishop e5, we now see a good move from Wesley. So he goes knight to e4. And this is actually a very important move because it prepares to meet pawn to c4. So you've moved the knight out of the way of the queen. So the queen now defends this pawn. And we now see the knight dropping back to f6. The reason that happened, say you went rook e8 or something, well, white now has a tactical shot to take twice on d5 with the knight, and this one's now loose. And there's none of this kind of in-between stuff, or you're taking here with check and that kind of thing. So queen captures, queen takes, and white would be a pawn up. So black does have to be careful. So no rook e8, not a good move. Bishop b4 was a tactical option, but Wesley goes for this rock-solid knight f6, and the rook now centralises to d1. So g6 now played by Wesley. He stops any knight f5 stuff. It was possible the move before, by the way. Instead of bringing the rook, you could have gone knight f5. But after bishop b4, actually it wasn't really going anywhere for white there. So good way to play from, forgetting his name now, I was about to say Sam Shankland. Hans Niemann, sorry. Good way to play from him. And he's still rock solid here, but he hasn't got too much in the position. And he plays kind of ambitiously now. So if you want to kind of steer this towards a draw, you can take on f6. Bishop recaptures, say you chop here, and then black's got this in-between knight f4 move. Queen goes, we'd see a liquidation here, very drawish position. So I'm showing this one because it kind of shows the mindset now from Hans Niemann. So instead of just chopping on f6, going for this drawish stuff, he goes g3, stops all of those knight f4 hops, and after a6 from Wesley, he takes control of the b5 square. Sometimes the white queen wants to pivot from there, attack d5 and b7, double attack, you know, if you ever exchanged here. Now we see rook e2. So here we see Hans preparing to double, rook e8 played, and now h4 is a very ambitious move. And actually a mistake unless you find this crazy computer line which Hans couldn't find. So the problem with this move is knight h5, which Wesley finds, and this bishop's now perilously short of retreat squares, as you can see, with the pawns on dark squares. f6 is coming, getting ready to force the bishop back, and then you're smashing up this pawn structure, really bad. So we had takes on d5, the pawn recaptures, and now Hans goes wrong. So he goes knight g2, very human move. The only way to actually keep advantage for white is this crazy b4 move. And the whole idea is that if f6 comes, you slide the queen to b3, say black picks up the piece, well then you take on d5 with the knight, and you're kind of ripping open these lines to the king, you're ripping open these files for the rooks. This knight could be hopping in at the right moment. Just to show you a sample line, say this knight retreated to protect this one, then you could take here, even with the pawn, which is quite interesting, to open this rook instead. King h8, let's say, knight f6, hits rook, hits queen with this one, queen b6, takes, and let's say a3 to defend this pawn. So just a sample line, and in this one, white emerges a rook and two pawns for two minor pieces, and is doing a bit better here. But really crazy computer stuff. I mean, no one just starts chucking pieces. So we see knight g2 played, much more human move, but this isn't good because f6 now comes, and if you retreat the bishop immediately, well, black can now smash up your pawn structure, really looks ugly. So instead of this one, we had this sneaky bishop to b8 move, and this now opens up the rook to attack the knight. So say this one was captured, well then we take here, suddenly white's doing fine again. I mean, no more than equal, but you're not kind of, you know, doing badly. But after bishop to b8, Wesley finds the excellent move, king f7. He just covers this knight and says, okay, what are you doing with your bishop? You still can't retreat it here with any kind of good game. So g4 was played. We'd love to see this knight move away. Then you go bishop g3. White's doing fine again. But of course, Wesley doesn't do that. He picks up the bishop with the queen. Pawn captures here. Now the knight hits f4, hits queen, hits rook. So taking is forced. This queen comes into the danger zone. It wants to check here. We had this one chucked in. The pawn recaptured, and now we had a double on the file here from Hans. So he does pressure the bishop, and Wesley shows great understanding here. He just goes into the endgame without the rooks. You can't really keep them on. I mean, you'd love to bring them to the H file and the G file and start attacking and all of that stuff, but there's too much pressure on this bishop, and if ever you try this G5 stuff, well then you open the queen on H7. So we just had bishop d6 here. We see the rooks coming off. There was a check flicked in first by Wesley. King goes, king recaptures, and now we had pawn to a4 here from Hans. So he puts his pawns on light squares. He doesn't want them attacked by this bishop at any point in time. And the onus is now on Wesley to actually find a way through into the white position. So Wesley's clearly better here. He's got the more active queen, better minor piece, safer king, better pawn structure. But you do have to now prove it. Queen e3 was played, comes to the open file. Now we had bishop f4, bishop b4, technically better, but this isn't such a bad move. Queen d3 back. We had a check from here. The king moved away, check, king f1, and now the queen offers a trade here. And you don't want to be taking this one. Whenever the recapture comes and it kicks this knight, well, this is just a very good endgame now for black. I won't go too much deeper on this because we see something quite similar in the game. So the queen slid to c3 instead. The bishop dropped back. Now king g2, check, king f1, king e7 from Wesley. The knight hops back to g1 here, so both players kind of passing with the moves. Queen f5, queen e3 check, queen e4 offers the trade, and now here we see a blunder from Hans under pressure. He still had some time on the clock here, but it's just not an easy position to play. So he goes king to e2, blunder. He should go knight to e2. And again, the idea is that you're kind of passing. If black takes, well, this endgame's okay. You've repaired some structure here. The king can get in, get active. You're okay. So say king f7 was played instead. Well, then, for example, you could slide with queen to h3, look for some invasion stuff maybe. White's doing just about okay. You also cover the pawn there in this line. But after king to e2, this is the problem. So probably Hans expected bishop to f4 there. But bishop to h2 is a big problem. You attack this knight, it saved itself by coming to f3, but now when you go bishop f4, you're forcing these queens off the board. You know, it's pinned to the king, so the queen can't move. It has to take, pawn recaptures, and now when the knight moves, you've got big problems because that capture came with tempo against the knight. The bishop is wonderfully placed, the pawns are still split, and after king to e6, we can see where this king is headed to pick up this pawn. So knight g2 hit the bishop. It goes all the way back to b8 because Wesley wants to attack this pawn from a7. Now knight e3 played, bishop a7, d5 check, king d6, and now knight g2 sets a small trap for black. If you take the pawn immediately, then we check and we pick up this one. This is far from simple anymore. Very, very good drawing chances. So instead of taking the pawn, the king came to e5. Now d6 was played. The pawn was captured this time and the knight comes to f4. This is why the pawn got chucked, just to decoy the king away, bring the knight in, attack this pawn. But Wesley kicks on now. Pawn captures, the knight comes back, hits the pawn, it kicks on. Knight g5 hits this pawn, defended by the king. Knight f7 check, king f4, and now king f1 was played here. Again, if you try and go active, knight d6, go after these pawns, well, something like e3 is a very simple way to win. Say captures with check, bishop captures, and if you start munching pawns, well, this G pawn is actually just going through. Say king covers, well, now king comes in, and you just can't stop the march. So you really can't go very active with this knight here. Instead, king f1 was played. Now bishop b6 from Wesley. And this is quite a nice waiting move because if you go king f3 immediately, which we see in the game, then there's knight g5 check and you're forced back. So this is why bishop b6 just waited a move, asked Hans what he wants to do. And sure enough, he moves this knight. I mean, if you go b4, you can even go bishop c7, just dominating all of those forward knight jumps. So the knight came to d6. Now king f3, there's no check from g5. This one came to c4, hits the bishop, but this was a lovely finish. You crash through here, and even though knight d2 check looks a bit, of an issue, because then maybe you're picking up a pawn or something, well, king f4 is just an excellent, classy response from Wesley. And here we had resignation, because if the king captures the free bishop, we simply check. King goes, we take here, and this pawn's going through, completely unstoppable. So really classy from Wesley there. Right strategy, stay solid, look for chances, and he got the win today as it happened. If you want to see another amazing game between Hans Niemann and Magnus Carlsen, the now infamous game, click here. Thanks for watching and see you soon.